My name is Ed Nowatka. I'm the editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, and I'm here with the global best-selling author Martin Walker, author and creator of the Inspector Bruno series, which has proven a favorite amongst readers in all parts of the world, even though they're set in France. And Martin, can you tell us a little bit, for people who are not familiar with the series and with your sleuth, can you tell us a little bit about the books and about Bruno, what you feel makes him appealing?
Well, I began writing the Bruno books back in 2007, 2008, and it was really based upon my own experiences. I have a house there in this lovely part of France called the Périgord, and my tennis partner is our local village policeman. And he's a very weird guy, a very unusual guy, in that he spends most of his mornings in summer teaching the kids to play tennis, in winter teaching them to play rugby. He hunts, he cooks. He's an ex-soldier. He never arrests anybody. He's long ago lost the key to his handcuffs. But we have no crime because all the kids grow up knowing him, and everybody likes Pierrot. We all know him. And I thought this guy made a wonderful idea for a cop. And so I wrote the first one, the first book called Bruno, Chief of Police. And because this part of the world is so extraordinarily rich in history and in food, I never lack for ideas. This is the heartland of truffles and of foie gras. It's got the wonderful Montbazillac wines and the Bergerac wines, so we live pretty well, and Bruno, my hero, eats very well, and there's lots of food in every single one of the Bruno books, which is why I'm now working on a cookbook of Bruno. And the real charm, I think, is that this is everybody's fantasy of France, where the food is wonderful, the women are all beautiful, the men are all gallant and romantic, and it's a wonderful, perfect weather and scenery, lots of glorious French history, and every once in a while, of course, there has to be a murder, because you couldn't have a crime story without it. And my friend, Pierrot, the policeman, occasionally takes me to task and says, well, I spend all my time trying to make sure there's no crime in our area, and yet you litter the landscape with corpses. Well, what can I do? But they've been a big success, these novels, somewhat to my surprise, including in our part of France, now that they're being published in France as well. It took a while in France, because the French publishers, I think, thought, what's a Scotsman doing writing about France? But when they saw that there were bestsellers elsewhere, they began printing them also in French. And we've got a population in my village of about 1,800 people. And we sold over 600 copies of the first book in the local press store. We don't have a bookstore, it's the Maison de la Presse. So it's newspapers more than books. And I signed every one, and they were all pretty happy. And now that I've been made an ambassador of the Périgord, because it's brought in quite a lot of tourists, it's become sort of a local institution, I think.
Are you seeing readers come to the region because they're attracted by your books?
Absolutely. I wrote, initially I wrote it for my family and friends, a little guide to a perfect week in the Périgord. And I put it on the BrunoChiefofPolice.com website. And my German publishers, Diogenes, who are based in Zurich, said, we have a marketing idea. And they turned this guide into a 16-page full-color booklet called Das Périgord, with lots of photographs, including one of me on the cover. And they've inserted it into every single book, paperback, hardback, that's now sold in Germany. They printed about 1 million of these things, and we now, for the first time, we have a huge number of German, Austrian, Swiss tourists coming, all of them waving their little guide and going to the restaurants that I recommended, where I'm finding it hard to get in, and going to my favorite vineyards where they stock up on wines that I've recommended. And so it's having a big effect.
You don't fear the Peter Mayle syndrome about what happened to his part of Provence?
Well, I just think it's so important for us, given that it's now a recession in France, to have the tourism. And it's great, because we live on the tourism, people, they're very friendly, and for Pierrot, my friend the policeman, he is ecstatic, because every day in the summer we've got readers coming in with their books in Dutch or Japanese or Turkish or Brazilian or German or Norwegian, and they look around for the policeman and they say, "Sind Sie Bruno?" or "Alligator Bruno?" And Piero says, "Jawohl, oui, je suis Bruno." And he signs a copy of their book and he stands to take a photograph with them. And
so he's unself-conscious about being your inspiration.
He absolutely loves it. And
it's an interesting muse to have adopted, a local
well,
French.
I mean, I have to say that Piero, the policeman, he's a bit older and much more married with a kid and a bit plumper, quite a lot plumper than my hero. But he's got that same sort of genial expression and a twinkle in his eye, and so he loves it, the tourists love it, and it's done wonders for tourism in the area. And now we're starting to get the Japanese tourists coming in as well, which is for the first time, really, and so that works well.
What is it about the marriage between mysteries and food? Because Andrea Camilleri novels in Italy, very popular, and you think of Monsieur Pamplemousse.
Yeah.
If you go back into French.
Yeah, and even Hercule Poirot for Agatha Christie. Yeah. Well, I think it's partly because all crime stories, in a way, are escapism. Okay. And that part of that escapism is if you can have a really good setting where people can let their imaginations wander a bit, and if you can make a mystery story that's also a bit of a travel book, it's also a bit of a cookbook, it's also a bit of sort of lifestyle and character as well as crime, then I think people start to get very fond of the characters, they get fond of the region, they get interested in the food, and well, my wife says with every new novel comes 2 extra kilos, so
it's very humanizing too.
Yeah.
Your hero has to eat something that
we all have to eat. I mean, we 3 times a day, most of us, and
it takes up a big part of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
You spent the majority of your career as a journalist,
yeah.
One of quite significant distinction. And how has this transition been to you? I mean, it's been quite a while, but I'm curious if you could sort of reflect on it, because coming from journalism, which itself is a beleaguered profession, turning yourself into a novelist, which isn't exactly a growth industry. Well, it's certainly a growth industry in numbers, but of course, there's always concerns about reading and books and the future of literacy. Yeah. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, the question is the transition from being a journalist. I was bureau chief for The Guardian, a British newspaper in Moscow, in Washington, D.C., in Europe, and the transition from that to writing novels. Well, it's all writing, I guess, and one useful thing about having been a reporter with a daily deadline is that you never seem to get much writer's block. I mean, you can just keep on writing. But it's, frankly, what happened to me was that when I came to the Perigord, when we first got our place there, I was sort of liberated, because all of my books before that had been non-fiction books of history and politics, economics. I wrote a book on the history of the Cold War, which is still a set book in a lot of schools and colleges. Books about Gorbachev and Perestroika, books on American history, and so on. And when I got to the Perigord, the combination of this extraordinary amount of history that there is there, and the lifestyle, the food, the wine, the pleasure of the place, sort of made me just want to write fiction. And so that was it, and I did. Well,
you'd had enough reality at that point.
I probably had quite a lot of reality by that. In fact, after the Iraq War, I'd had more than enough reality. But I think one of the things about being a journalist is that you remain curious about places. And I know that every time I was a foreign correspondent in a new country, the first thing I would do would be to read as much as I could of the history of that country. So I felt I had a sense of what made the place the way it was, what made the place tick. And that's been fascinating to do in the Perigord in France, and I've learned a lot more about French history, and I bring in a huge amount of French history into my novels. So in the last one, The Devil's Cave, that's come out, I actually went back into the French National Archives to find the records of the court case brought against the mistress of Louis XIV, Madame de Montespan, who was accused of witchcraft in creating a love potion in the course of a black mass in order to win the king's heart. And the witch that she employed was burned at the stake. The defrocked priest she used was imprisoned for life, but Madame de Montespan ended up firmly ensconced in the royal bed and gave the king 5 children. So it must have been a pretty powerful love potion that she did. So, and then in the current one, the book I'm writing at the moment, the 7th one, which is called Children of War. There's a lot of the background of the Jewish children who were saved by being hidden and sheltered in rural France during World War II. And in the book that's about to come out in the States, called The Resistance Man, again there's a historical background to it. I write about what turns out to be, it's long forgotten, but it was the world's biggest ever train robbery. It was at a place called Neuvic, and the resistance in July of 1944 robbed the train of the entire reserves of the Bank of France that the Germans were trying to ship out to Bordeaux to put into a submarine for unknown purposes. And it was 2.4 billion francs in 1944. And I checked with the exchange rate that the American embassy began using with francs at the end of 1944 after Paris was liberated. And so in today's money, it's around about 400 million bucks, or about 300 million euros, which is a big piece of change, and most of that money disappeared. And it's been pretty vague what happened to it. So that's the start of my 6th Bruno novel, The Resistance Man.
It's quite a hook. When can we expect to see it?
That comes out this spring in the States. It's being published in March in the USA, and I'll be back in Houston as part of my American book tour.
Fantastic. I suppose one question that's worth asking, and this can be our final question, is you've seen readers across the world react to your books. How are they reacting differently? Are there things that you've picked up on the cultural interpretation or focus that different nationalities have taken to? And I'm also curious if there's anything that readers are consistently misinterpreting or getting wrong about your books from your point of view that you'd like to correct.
Well, I think there's a number of things that people like. One of them is that all around the world people are fascinated by this complexity of the French police system, because we've got 3 police services. You've got the Police Nationale or the Police Judiciaire, who are like the FBI in a way. They work all over France, they're very much the scientific police. We have the gendarmes. Now, whereas the Police Nationale report to the Justice Ministry, the gendarmes report to the Ministry of Defense, because they are paramilitaries, they are in effect soldiers. But they do a lot of the law enforcement in rural areas. And the 3rd group are the Police Municipale, which is what my guy is, my hero, Bruno. But all of the cops you will see in Paris are the Police Municipale, the town police of Paris. Yeah. And they report to the mayor of Paris, just as my guy reports to his mayor, who's quite an important character in my books. And people love this complexity of France. One thing they all love, no matter whether we're talking Brazil or Turkey or the food, they love the food stuff. The Germans have a particular, how do I put it, a particular interest in the stuff I write about World War II, the occupation, Vichy, and so on. But it's fascinating how much the Germans seem to have taken, because that's my biggest sale is in Germany. It's over 1 million books now in Germany. Is the way in which they've taken Bruno to their hearts. And in fact, German TV is making a TV series on Bruno this year.
So the Germans, not the French.
The French are on their way, because the French Arte, the French Arts Channel, is now going to be sharing in the production of it. So
it's a collaboration.
There we are, Franco-German collaboration. I brought them together.
Well, listen, Martin, thank you very much. And what's the publication date and the latest book again?
The latest book is called Children of War, and it's being published in March of this year. And then in the fall of this year, the Bruno cookbook is going to be launched at the Frankfurt Book Fair.
And we can look forward to that.
Bon appetit. Bon appetit.